I stood in my parents' living room holding the foreclosure papers they'd just handed me, my hands trembling with disbelief. The same people who told me my $70,000 tech startup was too risky were now begging me to sell my house to save them from bankruptcy. Around me, empty spaces marked where expensive furniture used to sit, furniture they'd bought for my sister Madison's failed interior design business with money they claimed they didn't have for my dreams. My father's desperate voice cut through the silence, pleading for $700,000. My response was crystal clear. I said no then. You're hearing no now. 3 years earlier, I'd walked into this same living room with a leather portfolio containing my business plan, financial projections, and dreams of building something meaningful. I'd spent months researching the market for AI-powered project management software, identifying gaps that my solution could fill. The presentation was polished, professional, backed by solid data showing the potential for significant returns within 2 years. My father, Harold, sat in his favorite recliner, adjusting his reading glasses as I explained how small businesses struggled with project coordination, how my software could streamline their operations and save them thousands annually. My mother, Patricia, perched on the edge of the sofa, tapping her pen against her notebook like she was grading one of her former students' assignments. The initial investment would be $70,000, I said, clicking to my final slide. This covers server infrastructure, legal fees for patents, initial marketing, and living expenses for the first year while I build the client base. Harold removed his glasses and rubbed his temples. Dulcie, honey, the tech market is incredibly volatile right now. We've seen what happened to .com companies. How do we know this won't be another bubble? Dad, that was over 20 years ago. The market has matured significantly. Plus, I'm targeting established small businesses with real needs, not speculative ventures. Patricia shook her head slowly. Sweetheart, we just don't feel comfortable risking that kind of money on something so uncertain. What if it fails? We'd lose everything. The rejection stung, but I understood their caution. Harold worked as a corporate accountant, believing in steady paychecks and predictable returns. Patricia had taught elementary school for 30 years before retiring, always emphasizing the importance of security over risk. 1 week later, Madison bounced through the front door with paint swatches and fabric samples scattered in her arms. I've got the most amazing business idea, she announced, dumping her materials on the coffee table. Luxury interior design for high-end clients. I've already got 3 potential customers lined up. My parents' transformation was immediate. Harold leaned forward with interest while Patricia gathered the samples, examining each one with enthusiasm I'd never seen during my presentation. How much would you need to get started, sweetheart? Patricia asked, her voice warm and encouraging. Well, I'd need about $300,000 for the initial setup, office space, downtown inventory, marketing materials, and a vehicle for client visits. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Harold nodded thoughtfully. That sounds reasonable for a business with such clear profit potential. Within 48 hours, they'd approved Madison's loan request. Not only did they provide the $300,000 for her business, they also purchased her a brand new BMW X7 for $120,000, calling it a business investment, since she'd need reliable transportation for client meetings. The disparities became more glaring each week. Madison received a $5,000 monthly allowance for designer clothes, justified as necessary for maintaining her professional image. When I mentioned that I was eating ramen noodles to save money for my business launch, Patricia suggested I could always move back home to reduce expenses. Madison's office space was a 1,500-square-foot suite in the city's premium business district. My parents paid a down payment of $255,000 to secure her a 5-year lease with option to buy. Meanwhile, I was coding in my tiny studio apartment using a folding table as my desk and borrowing books from the library because I couldn't afford business courses. During Sunday family dinners, the conversation revolved entirely around Madison's latest projects. She'd describe wealthy clients with theatrical flair, painting pictures of mansion renovations and exclusive social events. My parents hung on every word, asking detailed questions about her design choices and praising her creativity. When I tried to share updates about my software development progress, the response was polite but disinterested. Harold would nod briefly before steering the conversation back to Madison's adventures. Patricia would make generic, encouraging sounds while checking her phone or clearing dishes. The pattern extended beyond business. Throughout our lives, Madison's romantic relationships were treated as epic love stories deserving family investment and emotional support. When her boyfriend needed a car, my parents co-signed a loan. When he wanted to attend a music festival across the country, they funded the trip as Madison's birthday gift. My relationship with Marcus, a talented software developer I'd met in a coding boot camp, barely registered on their radar. Despite his steady job, his kindness, and his unwavering support for my goals, my parents treated him like a temporary fixture. They never asked about his work, his family, or his interests. Madison's educational expenses had been covered without question. Private design school summer programs in Europe, continuing education seminars, all funded by our parents who believed in investing in their daughter's potential. I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for community college business courses, taking evening classes while managing a full-time retail position. The inequality was systematic and deliberate. Madison lived in a luxury apartment they helped her lease while I shared a cramped space with 2 roommates. She shopped at high-end boutiques with their credit card while I hunted for deals at thrift stores. She drove her BMW to expensive restaurants while I took the bus and packed lunches. 18 months into Madison's interior design venture, the business had generated 0 profit. Her client presentations were poorly organized, her design choices impractical, and her project management non-existent. Several clients had demanded refunds after Madison failed to deliver promised results on time and within budget. During one particularly tense family dinner, Madison announced her next brilliant idea. "I'm thinking of expanding into wedding planning. High-end events, exclusive venues, celebrity clients. It's like interior design, but with more glamour and better profit margins." My parents exchanged excited glances. Harold pulled out his calculator, already running numbers for this new investment opportunity. That's when they revealed their most shocking decision yet. They were taking out a second mortgage on the family home, the house where I'd grown up, the foundation of their financial security, to fund Madison's transition into wedding planning. Another $200,000 to chase another of her impulsive dreams. I set down my fork and stared at them in disbelief. You're mortgaging your home for a business venture when her first company hasn't made a single dollar profit. Madison just needs time to find her niche, Patricia defended. Wedding planning is a natural evolution of her design skills. What about retirement planning? What about medical emergencies? What if the housing market crashes? Harold waved away my concerns. Madison has a good business sense. She just needs the right opportunity to shine. I realized then that logic and financial prudence would never apply to decisions involving Madison. She existed in a bubble where failure was temporary, where every setback was just a stepping stone to inevitable success, where our parents' resources were infinite and unconditionally available. That night, I called Marcus from my apartment, my voice breaking as I described the dinner conversation. They're willing to risk their entire financial future for her, but my proven business model with paying customers was too dangerous to support. Marcus listened patiently before responding. Dulcie, their decisions say nothing about the value of your ideas and everything about their inability to see your potential. We're going to build this company with or without their help, and we're going to prove them wrong. 2 years passed as I built my company from the ground up, bootstrapping every expense while watching Madison's empire expand with endless parental funding. My days began at 5 a.m. with coding sessions before heading to my restaurant job where I served breakfast and lunch shifts to pay rent and buy ramen noodles for dinner. The restaurant work was exhausting, but it taught me valuable lessons about customer service and operational efficiency that would later benefit my business. Craig, the manager, noticed my dedication and often let me use the back office computer during breaks to work on my software development. My first breakthrough came when Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a dentist who frequented the restaurant, overheard me explaining my project management software concept to another customer. She was frustrated with her practice's scheduling chaos and asked if I could create something to help organize patient appointments, staff schedules, and equipment maintenance. I spent 3 weeks developing a customized solution for her practice. The software integrated appointment booking, insurance verification, inventory tracking, and staff communication into one streamlined system. Within 30 days of implementation, Dr. Walsh's practice increased efficiency by 40%, reduced scheduling conflicts by 90%, and improved patient satisfaction scores dramatically. Word spread through the local medical community as Dr. Walsh shared her results at professional meetings. Soon I had inquiries from other dental practices, veterinary clinics, and small medical offices. Each new client provided feedback that helped me refine the software and add features that addressed common pain points in small business operations. Marcus joined as my co-founder, bringing his technical expertise and shared vision for transforming how small businesses manage their operations. We worked from my apartment using folding tables as desks and drinking coffee from mason jars while building the foundation of what would become a successful company. Meanwhile, Madison's wedding planning venture was imploding spectacularly. Her first major event, a $50,000 society wedding, ended in disaster when she double-booked the venue, ordered flowers in the wrong color scheme, and hired a caterer who served undercooked chicken to 200 guests. The bride's family sued for damages, and the story made local news as a cautionary tale about hiring inexperienced planners. Rather than acknowledging Madison's failure, my parents immediately funded her third business venture, an artisanal bakery specializing in custom cakes and gourmet pastries. The initial investment was $180,000 for commercial kitchen equipment, lease deposits, and inventory. They also hired a business consultant to help Madison develop operational procedures, something they'd never offered to do for my startup. Madison's Bakery opened with great fanfare, featuring elaborate grand opening celebrations and expensive marketing campaigns. Local food bloggers were invited to sample products, and my parents proudly displayed newspaper clippings about their daughter's entrepreneurial spirit. The bakery's failure was even more dramatic than her previous ventures. Within 8 months, a severe food poisoning incident affected 43 customers who had consumed Madison's specialty cupcakes. Health department investigations revealed multiple violations: improper food storage, inadequate temperature control, and contaminated ingredients. The bakery was shut down permanently, and lawsuits from affected customers began piling up. During this period, my company was thriving. We'd expanded beyond medical practices to serve law firms, accounting offices, and consulting agencies. Our client base grew to 37 businesses across 3 states, with annual recurring revenue reaching $200,000. Marcus and I were featured in a local business journal's profile of emerging entrepreneurs. My parents showed no interest in these achievements. They attended Madison's failed bakery opening, but never asked to see our office or meet our clients. When I mentioned being featured in the business journal, Patricia made a brief comment about being proud before immediately shifting the conversation to Madison's latest crisis and how they were helping her manage the legal complications. The financial strain on my parents was becoming obvious, though they denied any problems when I expressed concern. Harold looked perpetually stressed, his hair graying rapidly, and his usual calm demeanor replaced by irritability. Patricia started making comments about the cost of groceries and utilities, but always in the context of general economic concerns rather than personal financial pressure. I discovered the true scope of their financial problems through a chance encounter at the bank. Sarah, a loan officer I'd known since high school, mentioned seeing my parents frequently for loan modifications and extensions. She couldn't provide details due to confidentiality rules, but her expression conveyed serious concern about their financial stability. That evening, I drove to their house unannounced, finding them in the kitchen surrounded by paperwork and calculators. Harold was on the phone with someone, his voice strained as he discussed payment schedules and interest rates. Patricia sat at the table sorting through bills and making notes in a ledger. "What's going on?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. They initially tried to minimize the situation, claiming they were simply reorganizing their finances for better tax efficiency. But the evidence was clear: credit card statements with enormous balances, past due notices for utilities, and mortgage documents showing multiple refinancing attempts. Eventually, Harold admitted they'd taken out a third mortgage plus several personal loans totaling $125,000 to fund Madison's bakery disaster. They'd been making minimum payments on credit cards while using cash advances to cover basic living expenses. The house that had been paid off 10 years earlier was now leveraged to dangerous levels. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" I asked, feeling a mixture of anger and sympathy. "We didn't want to burden you with our problems," Patricia said. "Besides, Madison's businesses were supposed to generate enough income to cover everything." The irony was overwhelming. They'd been willing to risk their financial security repeatedly for Madison's failed ventures while refusing to invest a fraction of that amount in my proven profitable business. Even now, facing potential bankruptcy, they couldn't acknowledge the fundamental flaw in their decision-making process. Marcus found me crying in the parking lot when I left their house that night. I explained the situation, my emotions swinging between fury and heartbreak. "They're going to lose everything because they can't say no to her," I said. "Maybe this will finally open their eyes," Marcus replied, holding me as I processed the implications of my parents' financial recklessness. But I was wrong about their capacity for learning from mistakes. The very next week, they revealed their most devastating decision yet. 6 months later, my company achieved a major milestone that should have been a moment of family celebration. We'd won a contract with the regional hospital system to implement our project management software across all their outpatient clinics. The 3-year deal was worth $500,000 annually and positioned us as a leader in healthcare technology solutions. I called my parents to share the news, hoping this achievement might finally earn their recognition and respect. Patricia answered the phone, her voice distant and distracted. "That's wonderful, honey," she said in the same tone she might use to acknowledge a weather report. "Listen, we're dealing with some urgent family matters right now. Can I call you back later?" The callback never came. Instead, I learned from neighborhood gossip that Madison had announced her 4th business venture, a luxury pet grooming salon featuring organic products and spa treatments for affluent pet owners. My parents had somehow secured a business loan for $275,000 using their home and retirement accounts as collateral. The math was staggering. Over 3 years, they had invested over $725,000 in Madison's failed businesses while refusing to provide $70,000 for my startup. Their total debt had reached astronomical levels, yet they continued enabling her entrepreneurial fantasies. Marcus and I celebrated our hospital contract, quietly taking ourselves to dinner at a modest restaurant where we planned our company's expansion strategy. "They don't deserve to share in your success," Marcus said, raising his glass of wine. "You built this without their help, and that makes it entirely yours." Meanwhile, Madison's pet grooming salon was heading toward an even more spectacular failure than her previous ventures. She'd hired inexperienced staff, purchased expensive equipment she didn't know how to use, and implemented grooming procedures she'd learned from YouTube videos rather than professional training. The disaster came 3 months after opening. Madison's staff used industrial-strength flea shampoo on 12 dogs during a single afternoon, causing severe chemical burns that required emergency veterinary treatment. The affected animals suffered painful skin reactions, hair loss, and emotional trauma that lasted for months. Pet owners filed lawsuits immediately, with damages reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Local animal rights groups protested outside the salon, carrying signs demanding justice for the injured pets. The story went viral on social media, with Madison's business becoming a symbol of incompetence and animal cruelty. The salon's insurance company denied coverage, determining that gross negligence voided their policy protections. Madison faced personal liability for all damages, legal fees, and veterinary expenses. The business closed within days, leaving my parents responsible for the massive loan they'd guaranteed. As the legal and financial consequences mounted, Madison made a decision that revealed her true character. Rather than facing responsibility for the damage she'd caused, she announced she was taking a trip to California to find herself and explore new opportunities. She packed her BMW with designer clothes and disappeared, leaving our parents to handle 12 separate lawsuits and mounting debt. Harold's health began deteriorating under the stress. He suffered what doctors initially suspected was a heart attack, but turned out to be severe anxiety-induced chest pains. The episode required an emergency room visit, followed by cardiology consultations and stress management therapy. Medical bills added another layer to their financial crisis. Dr. Martin Kim, Harold's cardiologist, warned that continued stress could lead to serious cardiac events. He recommended lifestyle changes, including reduced work hours, financial counseling, and family therapy to address underlying issues causing the anxiety. Patricia started calling me daily, though she never directly asked for help. Instead, she'd mention their struggles, indirectly comments about expensive prescription medications, worries about heating bills, observations about how much groceries cost these days. Her strategy was transparent, but emotionally manipulative, designed to make me feel guilty without explicitly requesting assistance. During one of these calls, I learned about Madison's additional betrayal. Chelsea, her former business partner from the pet salon, contacted me with shocking information. Madison had been forging our parents' signatures on credit applications, opening store credit accounts in their names, and using family credit for personal expenses, including designer drugs and gambling debts. She spent thousands at casinos using credit cards in your parents' names, Chelsea revealed. She also bought cocaine and expensive jewelry, claiming it was all business expenses for networking events. I hired a private investigator to document Madison's activities and discovered the full scope of her financial crimes. She'd accumulated an additional $125,000 in debt using fraudulent applications and forged documents. The total family debt had reached $850,000, while Madison was unreachable somewhere in California. The investigators' report included photographs of Madison at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and exclusive parties, all funded by money stolen from our parents through identity theft and forgery. She was living a fantasy lifestyle while our parents faced bankruptcy and potential homelessness. When I presented this evidence to Harold and Patricia, their response was heartbreaking. Rather than expressing anger at Madison's betrayal, they made excuses for her behavior. "She's been under so much stress," Patricia said. "The business failures probably triggered some kind of breakdown." Harold nodded in agreement. "Maybe she just needed space to figure things out. When she comes back, we'll get everything sorted out." Their refusal to acknowledge Madison's criminal behavior and hold her accountable demonstrated how deeply their enabling had damaged the entire family. They couldn't see that their unconditional financial support had created a monster who felt entitled to exploit them without consequences. That night, I sat with Marcus in our shared home office, surrounded by evidence of Madison's betrayal and my parents' willful blindness. "They're going to lose everything," I said, feeling a mixture of anger and grief. "And they're still hoping she'll come back and somehow fix it all." Marcus reviewed the investigators' findings with a programmer's eye for detail. "She's not coming back voluntarily," he said. "She's committed federal crimes. When this catches up to her, she'll be facing serious jail time." The next morning brought another devastating revelation that would push our family crisis to its ultimate breaking point. 3 months passed before my parents reached their absolute breaking point. The house I'd grown up in, the symbol of their middle-class stability and decades of responsible financial management, was officially in foreclosure proceedings. A bright orange notice was posted on the front door, visible to neighbors and announcing their financial failure to the entire community. Patricia appeared at my office on a Tuesday afternoon, her usual composed appearance replaced by obvious desperation. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes red from crying. She stood in our reception area trembling as she asked to speak with me privately. "Dulcie, I need to talk to you about the family situation," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I led her to our conference room, closing the door as she collapsed into a chair and began sobbing uncontrollably. The woman who had always maintained perfect composure was completely broken, her world crashing down around her in ways she'd never imagined possible. "We're going to lose the house," she said between tears. "Everything we worked for, everything we built, it's all gone. The bank says we have 30 days before eviction." For the first time in my life, I saw my mother as vulnerable and human rather than the authoritative figure who had always seemed to have answers for everything. Her breakdown was genuinely heartbreaking, even though I knew their circumstances resulted directly from their own choices. Harold arrived an hour later, looking equally devastated. He'd taken time off from his accounting job to deal with the crisis, but his absence from work meant reduced income at the worst possible time. His usual logical approach to problem-solving had abandoned him, leaving him confused and overwhelmed by the magnitude of their debt. "We owe $725,000, Harold said, spreading financial documents across the conference table. Mortgages, business loans, credit cards, legal settlements from the pet grooming lawsuits, medical bills from my heart episode. It's more than we could possibly repay even if we both worked for another 20 years. The numbers were staggering. They'd leveraged every asset, exhausted every line of credit, and committed their future earnings to fund Madison's string of failed businesses. Their retirement accounts had been emptied, their life insurance policies borrowed against, and their home was mortgaged beyond its current market value. "There's only one solution," Patricia said, looking at me with desperate hope. "Your house is worth about $400,000. If you sell it and give us the proceeds, we can negotiate with creditors and maybe save our home." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My house represented everything I'd achieved through years of sacrifice and hard work. I'd saved for the down payment while working multiple jobs, qualified for the mortgage based on my business income, and furnished it slowly with carefully chosen pieces that reflected my personal style and independence. "You want me to sell my home to pay for Madison's mistakes?" I asked, incredulous. "It's not about Madison," Harold insisted. "It's about family. We raised you, supported you, gave you every opportunity to succeed. Now we need you to help us when we're facing our darkest hour." Their selective memory was astounding. They'd supported Madison financially while making me work for everything I'd achieved. They'd funded her lifestyle while I ate ramen noodles and shared cramped apartments. They'd invested in her dreams while calling mine too risky. Where was this family obligation when I needed $70,000 to start my business? I asked. "That was different," Patricia said. "That was about taking a risk on an unproven idea. This is about preventing our family from becoming homeless." The manipulation was obvious but emotionally effective. They were framing my refusal to sacrifice my home as abandonment of family duty while ignoring their own abandonment of their parental responsibility to treat their children equally. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had become both a client and mentor, arrived at the office as my parents were leaving. She'd observed the emotional meeting through the glass conference room walls and asked if I needed support. "They want me to sell my house to pay their debts," I told her, explaining the full scope of the family financial crisis. Dr. Walsh listened carefully before responding. "Dulcie, you cannot set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they're the ones who started the fire. Enabling their poor decisions by sacrificing your own financial security won't help them learn to make better choices." That evening, Marcus proposed to me in our living room the same space my parents wanted me to sell to rescue them from their self-created crisis. His timing wasn't planned around the family drama, but the contrast was symbolic. He was offering me a future built on mutual respect and shared goals, while my parents were demanding I sacrifice that future to pay for their favoritism toward Madison. "I love this house because it represents everything you've accomplished," Marcus said, kneeling beside the fireplace we'd spent weekend evenings planning our future around. "You bought this with money you earned, furnished it with possessions you chose, and made it a home that reflects your values and dreams." I said yes to his proposal while calling my parents to decline their request. "I won't sell my house to pay Madison's debts," I told them clearly. "You made these financial decisions without consulting me, and I won't sacrifice my future to fix them." Patricia's response was immediate and harsh. "Family means helping each other during difficult times. If you won't help us, you're choosing money over the people who love you." "Where was that principle when you spent over $700,000 on Madison while refusing to invest $70,000 in my business?" I replied. The conversation ended with Patricia hanging up on me, but I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete confidence in my decision. For the first time in my life, I'd set a clear boundary with my parents and refused to let their manipulation override my better judgment. Dr. Amanda Foster, a family therapist Dr. Walsh had recommended, helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my parents' financial crisis and my decision to maintain boundaries. "They've created a crisis and are now demanding you solve it for them," she explained. "That's not healthy family dynamics. That's emotional manipulation designed to make you responsible for problems you didn't create." The therapy sessions helped me understand that my parents' favoritism toward Madison wasn't just about money. It reflected deeper issues with their ability to assess character, make sound judgments, and maintain appropriate boundaries with their adult children. 2 weeks later, I discovered Madison's final betrayal, one that would force me to take decisive action to protect everything I'd built. Madison's return from California came without warning or apology, as if her disappearance during the family's financial crisis was a minor inconvenience rather than a devastating abandonment. She arrived at my parents' house in her BMW, accompanied by Derek, a new boyfriend she'd apparently acquired during her months of avoiding responsibility. I learned about her return through a text message from Patricia. "Madison is back safe. Family meeting Sunday at 2. Please come so we can work things out together." The audacity was breathtaking. After leaving our parents to face bankruptcy lawsuits and potential homelessness while she partied in California using stolen credit, Madison expected a family meeting to work things out, as if this were a minor disagreement requiring compromise. I arrived at my parents' house to find Madison holding court in the living room, describing her California adventures with theatrical enthusiasm. She spoke about spiritual awakening, creative inspiration, and networking with influential people who appreciated her entrepreneurial vision. Derek nodded supportively, apparently unaware of the destruction Madison had left behind. "I've had time to think about my next business venture," Madison announced, as if her previous failures were learning experiences rather than catastrophic disasters. "I want to start a tech company focused on social media marketing for luxury brands." The irony was staggering. Madison's tech startup idea was essentially a plagiarized version of my original business proposal from 3 years earlier. She'd taken my concept of using technology to solve business problems and twisted it into another scheme targeting the wealthy clients she'd always been obsessed with impressing. Harold and Patricia listened with renewed hope, apparently believing Madison's return signaled a commitment to fixing the family's problems. They asked enthusiastic questions about her business plan, while ignoring the obvious fact that she'd never demonstrated any technical skills or marketing expertise. "How much startup capital would you need?" Patricia asked, as if they had any money left to invest. Probably around $100,000 to get started," Madison replied casually. "But this time will be different. I've learned from my past mistakes, and I have connections now who can help ensure success." I couldn't remain silent any longer. "Madison, you've spent over $700,000 on failed businesses that never generated a profit. Our parents are facing foreclosure because of loans they took to fund your ventures. How can you possibly ask for more money?" Madison's response revealed her complete disconnection from reality. Those weren't failures, Dulcie. They were learning experiences that prepared me for this opportunity. Besides, Mom and Dad invested in my potential, and now I'm ready to deliver returns on their investment. Derek chimed in with support for Madison's perspective. She's told me all about her entrepreneurial journey. Sometimes you have to fail a few times before finding your true calling. I realized that Derek had no idea about Madison's criminal activities, the forged documents, the identity theft, or the devastating impact of her behavior on our family. She'd constructed an alternate reality where she was a misunderstood visionary rather than a destructive force. Marcus arrived with a folder containing evidence we'd compiled about Madison's fraudulent activities. Bank records, credit applications, witness statements, and photographs documenting her California spending spree using stolen funds. The documentation was thorough and devastating. "Before we discuss any new business ventures," Marcus said calmly, "we should address Madison's existing legal problems." He spread the evidence across the coffee table credit card statements, showing charges at luxury hotels and casinos, forged loan applications using Harold and Patricia's information, and photographs of Madison partying while our parents faced bankruptcy. Detective Laura Martinez had been investigating Madison's case for weeks, building a federal fraud case that included identity theft, wire fraud, and interstate commerce violations. The evidence was overwhelming, and arrest warrants had already been issued. "Madison has committed multiple felonies," Marcus explained. "The FBI is tracking her financial crimes across state lines. She's facing potential federal prison time, not a new business opportunity." Derek's expression changed as he realized the woman he'd been dating was a federal fugitive. Patricia began crying again, finally confronting the reality of Madison's criminal behavior. Harold sat in stunned silence, processing the implications of the evidence. But Madison's response was characteristically narcissistic. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said dismissively. "Those were legitimate business expenses that got categorized incorrectly. Derek and I were building professional networks that will benefit the whole family." Her refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing or accept responsibility was absolute. Even faced with documented evidence of her crimes, Madison maintained her victim narrative and continued making demands for financial support. "I need money to hire a good lawyer to clear up these misunderstandings," she said to our parents. "Maybe $50,000 to ensure I get proper representation." Harold and Patricia looked at me expectantly, as if I should provide the legal fees for Madison's criminal defense. Their assumption that I would fund her defense against charges of stealing from our own family demonstrated how completely they'd lost touch with appropriate boundaries. "I won't provide money for Madison's legal problems," I said clearly. "She created this situation through her own choices, and she needs to face the consequences." Patricia's response was devastating in its moral confusion. "Dulcie, she's your sister. Family members support each other during legal troubles. How can you abandon her when she needs help the most?" The conversation continued for hours, with my parents alternating between denying Madison's guilt and demanding I help pay for her defense. Madison herself remained convinced that her problems would disappear if she could just access enough money to hire expensive attorneys and continue her lifestyle. That evening, Marcus and I discovered Madison's most shocking betrayal yet. She'd been working with a paralegal friend to prepare documentation claiming ownership stake in my business, arguing that our parents' financial support during my childhood constituted family investment in my education and future earning potential. She's trying to claim half your company," Marcus said, reviewing the fraudulent legal documents. "She convinced your parents to sign affidavits stating they provided startup funding for your business through educational investments. The paperwork was sophisticated and potentially damaging. Madison had researched intellectual property law and found technicalities she could exploit to make legal claims against my business assets. If successful, she could force a sale of my company to pay her imaginary ownership stake." I realized Madison wasn't just a destructive force in our family. She was an active predator who would steal anything she could access, including the business I'd built through years of sacrifice and hard work. Her return wasn't about family reconciliation. It was about identifying new sources of money to fund her criminal lifestyle. The final confrontation was approaching, and I knew I had to take decisive action to protect everything I'd worked to build. 2 weeks after Madison's fraudulent legal documents surfaced, I hired attorney Nathan Brooks to protect my business from her predatory claims. Nathan specialized in business litigation and had experience dealing with family members who attempted to steal intellectual property through manipulative legal strategies. Her documentation is sophisticated but legally baseless, Nathan explained during our first meeting. However, defending against frivolous claims costs time and money, which is exactly what she's counting on. She's hoping you'll settle rather than fight. Nathan filed protective orders preventing Madison from accessing my business accounts or claiming ownership of company assets. We also prepared counter-litigation for her identity theft crimes, creating legal pressure that would force her to focus on defending herself rather than attacking my company. Meanwhile, my parents made one final desperate attempt to convince me to sacrifice everything for Madison's benefit. They arrived at my house on a Saturday morning, both looking older and more frail than I'd ever seen them. The stress of their financial crisis had aged them dramatically, and their desperation was heartbreaking to witness. "Dulcie, we need to talk about saving our family," Patricia said, settling onto my living room sofa where Marcus and I had gotten engaged just weeks earlier. Harold spread financial documents across my coffee table showing payment demands, foreclosure timelines, and legal settlement requirements. The numbers were overwhelming, representing decades of poor decisions and enabling Madison's destructive behavior. "If you sell your house and liquidate your business assets, we could raise about $600,000, Harold said, apparently having researched the market value of everything I owned. "Combined with our retirement funds, that would be enough to negotiate settlements and maybe save our home." Their proposal was stunning in its audacity. They wanted me to destroy everything I'd built to pay for Madison's crimes while she faced no consequences for the damage she'd caused. They'd calculated the exact value of my assets and developed a plan to transfer my wealth to their creditors. "You're asking me to become homeless and unemployed to pay Madison's gambling debts and legal settlements," I said, my voice steady despite my internal fury. "We're asking you to prove you love your family more than material possessions," Patricia replied, using emotional manipulation tactics I now recognized clearly. I responded by presenting my own financial analysis. Using charts and graphs similar to business presentations I delivered to clients, I showed them the 25-year pattern of favoritism, inequitable treatment, and financial discrimination I'd endured as their daughter. Madison received $725,000 in business funding plus housing assistance, vehicle purchases, clothing allowances, and educational expenses, I explained. I received $0 in business support and worked multiple jobs to pay for my own education and living expenses. The documentation was thorough and undeniable. I'd tracked every major financial decision they'd made, every opportunity they'd provided to Madison, while denying similar support to me, every dollar they'd invested in her failures while calling my success too risky. "I offered to repay any educational investments you made in me," I continued, "but you never actually invested in my education or my business. You told me I was too risky while handing Madison unlimited funding for ventures that never generated any revenue." Harold tried to argue that my success proved their approach was correct, that I developed independence and self-reliance through adversity. But the argument was hollow and self-serving. They hadn't withheld support to teach me valuable lessons. They'd withheld support because they preferred Madison and believed her dreams deserved funding while mine deserved skepticism. Patricia attempted emotional manipulation one final time. "If you don't help us, we'll lose everything. Your childhood home, your father's health, our ability to maintain dignity in our community. Is your house really worth destroying your family?" "You destroyed this family when you chose to enable Madison's criminal behavior while ignoring her victims," I replied. "I'm not responsible for fixing problems I didn't create." Marcus joined the conversation at that point, providing outside perspective on the family dynamics he'd observed for years. Harold, Patricia, you've treated Dulcie as a backup plan for solving problems caused by Madison's irresponsibility. That's not fair to anyone, and it won't help Madison learn to make better choices. The conversation lasted 4 hours with my parents, alternating between guilt trips, false promises, and desperate appeals to family loyalty. They offered to sign contracts guaranteeing repayment if I provided emergency funding, despite having no realistic means of honoring such commitments. Finally, I presented them with my alternative proposal. I'll help you find family therapy resources and financial counseling services, I said. I'll provide emotional support as you navigate bankruptcy and downsizing, but I won't sacrifice my financial security to enable more destructive behavior. Their rejection was immediate and angry. Harold accused me of abandoning family values for material gain. Patricia said I'd become selfish and cold, caring more about possessions than relationships. You're choosing money over family, Patricia said as they prepared to leave. No, I replied. I'm choosing healthy boundaries over emotional manipulation. I'm choosing consequences over enabling. I'm choosing to break the cycle of dysfunction that's destroyed our family's financial security. That evening, Nathan called with disturbing news. My parents had been secretly recording our conversations, hoping to use my words against me in potential legal proceedings. They'd planned to claim emotional abuse and demand financial support through court-ordered family assistance laws. What, the recordings are inadmissible because they didn't have your consent, Nathan explained. But this shows how desperate they've become. They're willing to betray your trust and privacy to force you into paying Madison's debts. The revelation was heartbreaking, but clarifying. My parents had moved beyond requesting help to actively plotting against me. They'd chosen Madison's interests over mine so completely that they were willing to use legal manipulation to steal my assets. Detective Martinez called the next morning with an update on Madison's case. Federal marshals had arrested her at a luxury hotel in Los Angeles where she was staying under a false name and using forged credit cards to fund her lifestyle. Derek had been released after cooperating with investigators, but Madison faced multiple federal charges carrying potential prison sentences of 10 to 20 years. She's requested a public defender because she claims to have no assets, Detective Martinez reported. But we've documented over $200,000 in fraudulent charges made during her time in California. My parents immediately began planning to mortgage whatever assets they had left to fund Madison's legal defense. Even facing their own bankruptcy, homelessness, and potential prosecution as accomplices to her crimes, they remained committed to rescuing her from consequences. I realized then that no amount of evidence, logic, or emotional appeal would change their priorities. They would sacrifice everything, including their relationship with me, to maintain their fantasy that Madison was a misunderstood victim rather than a criminal who destroyed their family's financial security. The time had come for my final decision about our family's future. Standing in my parents' living room 6 months later, surrounded by moving boxes and empty spaces where Madison's purchases used to be, I gave them my answer to their final desperate plea. I said no then. You're hearing no now. My refusal to sell my house marked the beginning of true freedom from family dysfunction that had controlled my life for decades. Within 30 days, Harold and Patricia lost their home to foreclosure and moved into a small apartment across town. The transition was difficult and humbling, but it forced them to confront the reality of their financial decisions for the first time. Madison was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and interstate commerce violations. The judge noted that her crimes had devastating impacts on family members and showed no evidence of remorse or rehabilitation potential. During the sentencing hearing, she maintained her innocence and blamed others for misunderstanding her business practices. The first months after my boundary-setting decision were emotionally challenging. Patricia called occasionally, alternating between angry accusations and pitiful appeals for financial assistance. Harold sent letters describing their reduced circumstances and implying I was responsible for their suffering through my refusal to sacrifice my own financial security. Dr. Foster helped me process the guilt and grief associated with family estrangement. "You didn't abandon them," she reminded me repeatedly. "You refused to enable destructive behavior that was harming everyone involved, including your parents themselves." My business continued thriving without the distraction of family financial crises. Marcus and I expanded our software platform to serve clients nationwide, eventually employing 15 people and generating annual revenues exceeding $2 million. Forbes magazine featured our company in their 30 Under 30 technology category, highlighting our innovative approach to small business project management. Dr. Walsh became my business partner when we launched a specialized division focused on healthcare technology solutions. Our software helped medical practices improve patient care while reducing administrative costs, creating measurable benefits that improved both business profitability and community health outcomes. Marcus and I were married in a small ceremony, attended by friends, colleagues, and his family who had embraced me as the daughter-in-law they'd always hoped for. His parents treated our achievements with genuine pride and support, providing the family encouragement I'd never experienced growing up. The contrast was stark and healing. Marcus's mother asked detailed questions about our business strategies and celebrated our successes with authentic enthusiasm. His father offered practical advice based on his own entrepreneurial experience while respecting our independence and decision-making autonomy. 6 months after my final refusal to rescue my parents from their financial crisis, Harold sent a letter that surprised me with its honesty and self-reflection. He'd begun seeing a therapist individually and was starting to understand how their favoritism had damaged both daughters and destroyed their family's financial security. "I realize now that we enabled Madison's irresponsible behavior while punishing you for being responsible," he wrote. "We called your proven business model too risky while funding Madison's fantasies without any realistic assessment of their potential. We demanded you sacrifice everything you'd earned while never requiring Madison to face any consequences for her failures." Patricia's acknowledgement took longer and was less complete, but eventually she admitted their treatment had been unfair and damaging. She struggled more with accepting responsibility, often backsliding into victim narratives and emotional manipulation, but therapy was helping her recognize patterns she'd never examined before. Madison's time in federal prison provided her with enforced sobriety and mandatory participation in financial responsibility programs. Her letters from prison showed gradual acceptance of her role in the family's destruction, though I remained skeptical about the permanence of her apparent transformation. "I spent years believing I was entitled to whatever I wanted because Mom and Dad always rescued me from consequences," she wrote during her 8th month of incarceration. "I never learned that actions have results, that businesses require actual work, that money comes from creating value rather than manipulating people." A year after my boundary-setting decision, I established a scholarship fund for young entrepreneurs whose families didn't support their business ventures. The program provided both financial assistance and mentorship for people building companies despite family skepticism or opposition. The scholarship recipients reminded me of my younger self, brilliant, motivated individuals whose families viewed their dreams as too risky while funding obviously poor decisions by favored relatives. Helping them achieve independence and success became one of the most meaningful aspects of my business growth. Dr. Walsh observed that my family estrangement had actually improved my business decision-making abilities. "You're no longer distracted by family drama or conflicted about setting appropriate boundaries with unreasonable demands," she noted. "That clarity has made you a more effective leader and entrepreneur." Marcus and I bought a larger house with space for the children we were planning, designing a home office where we could work together while maintaining separate professional identities. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership rather than the dysfunction and manipulation I'd witnessed growing up. 2 years after my refusal to sacrifice my financial security for my parents' poor decisions, they had stabilized their reduced circumstances and were slowly rebuilding their lives. Harold found part-time consulting work that utilized his accounting skills without the stress of full-time corporate employment. Patricia volunteered with literacy programs, finding purpose in helping others rather than enabling destructive family members. Their apartment was small but comfortable, furnished with practical pieces rather than the expensive items they'd bought to support Madison's lifestyle fantasies. The simplicity seemed to suit them better than the leveraged luxury they'd maintained while accumulating massive debt. Madison was released from prison with supervised probation and mandatory financial counseling. She moved to a different state and found employment in customer service, earning an honest living for the first time in her adult life. Our contact was minimal but civil, both of us understanding that trust would require years of consistent behavior to rebuild. The most profound lesson from our family crisis was about the difference between love and enabling. True love sometimes requires saying no, setting boundaries, and allowing people to experience consequences for their choices. Enabling destructive behavior in the name of family loyalty ultimately hurts everyone involved, including the person being enabled. I learned that my worth was never determined by my parents' approval, and my success was never dependent on their investment. The family you build with people who truly see your value is worth more than the family you're born into who refuses to recognize it. Our company's success proved that my original business vision was sound and my instincts were trustworthy. The $70,000 my parents refused to invest would have generated millions in returns if they'd believed in my potential rather than Madison's fantasies. Most importantly, I discovered that breaking cycles of dysfunction requires courage, boundaries, and commitment to healthy relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their poor choices even when they interpret boundaries as abandonment. Standing in my beautiful home with Marcus planning our future, I felt grateful for every difficult decision that had led to this moment of peace and authentic happiness. The family we were creating together was built on respect, honesty, and mutual support rather than manipulation and favoritism. Looking back, I realized that my parents' refusal to fund my startup was actually a gift. Building my company independently proved my capabilities and created genuine confidence that no amount of parental validation could have provided. Their rejection forced me to develop resilience and self-reliance that served me well in both business and personal relationships. The story of our family's financial destruction and eventual healing became a cautionary tale about the dangers of enabling destructive behavior while punishing responsibility. It also became a testament to the power of boundaries, self-respect, and choosing healthy relationships over dysfunctional family loyalty. Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the people whose poor choices you refuse to enable. True family support means believing in someone's dreams and helping them grow, not rescuing them from consequences they need to experience in order to learn and change. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own financial security? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about family business and personal growth. Share this with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you think about the boundaries and relationships in your own life. Remember, you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your success rather than demanding you sacrifice it for their mistakes.